Hi, I'm Pami Woodruff of the schooloflostarts.com and makeitwithpam.com, and I'm here with our Make It Challenge where we are making some throw pillows. This is day 3 and you have by now purchased your fabric, overcast the edge, and washed it. And if you're lucky, like me, you ended up with just a little bit of fuzziness here, nothing really pulling off. We're doing great. So now we're looking at this edge and it's not exactly straight. The way it came off the bolt and the way they cut it, it kind of scoops around a little. So what do we do to make sure we have a nice square edge and straight edges on all of our fabric that we cut out to make our pillow? Well, first of all, it helps to have something with a square right angle to measure against so you can make sure that it is square. If you are really fortunate, perhaps you can borrow one of these, a carpenter square. They work wonderful. If not that, perhaps you have a cookie sheet. This works. The corners rounded, but the edges are square against each other. Or perhaps a box. That works really nicely. You've got a good square corner here. If not that, perhaps the tiles of your kitchen floor or coffee table. There's lots of different ways to do this. Now here at home, the table is oval. That does not work, but the coffee table is square. So I'll be showing you that. It's got the corners cut off, but it's close enough. Let me show you a few other ideas of what you could use. What about the corner of the washer or dryer? Or perhaps a tile floor. This is an example of something that wouldn't work very well. Even though the horizontal lines are nice and straight, the vertical ones don't exactly meet up with the ones directly above them. So you don't have a nice long line to line up your fabric against. Just as well, this way I don't have to sweep and mop the floor first. Something else to be aware of before you start trimming. There are 2 different types of edges on your fabric. There is the cut edge, that's the one where the worker at the store cut your fabric, and that's the one that we did the overcast stitch on. And there is the selvage edge, which usually has a different type of weave and a different color along the edge. Sometimes the selvage edge will shrink more than the other edges. So this is something to be aware of. If it kind of pulls up a little bit, compared to the rest of the fabric, if it doesn't lay flat and smooth like this one is, you may need to cut that off right along the stripe, the color stripe on here, or you can measure in a 1/2 inch or 1/4 of an inch, however wide that is, and cut that off because it will behave differently and that will be, kind of a little bit annoying. If you can leave it, it's great because you don't need to overcast that edge, and that edge is already fray proof. Some fabrics have a stripe. Mine here has a lengthwise stripe, and so it looks best on your pillow if you keep that stripe straight up and down on the edges of the pillow. If yours has a plaid or a crosswise design, then you've got a line that runs across the fabric the direction that it was cut. If you are fortunate enough to have a design that goes along the edge of the fabric, you can just simply cut right straight along that line to get your nice straight edge. It's a great way to have a little shortcut, and then you don't need to clear off the coffee table. As you can see here, I've got my fabric laid out on the coffee table, and it's not quite smooth, but it's smooth enough for what we're going to do. Just kind of even it on out. If you've got a measuring device, you can place that along the edge of the fabric, move it around to line it up with a stripe or with the edge of the fabric or with the edge of the selvage like this. And you'll see that my fabric is not exactly cut straight. Now I knew that already. As I was overcasting the edge, I could feel it go up a little here and then scoop back down again. That's not a problem because we're going to even it out right now. If you've got one, I recommend a big fat carpenter's pencil for this next stage. If not, just a regular yellow pencil will work just fine. Now in this particular case, I think it'll be easier for me to follow along if I place the edge of this ruler right along the edge of the selvage. It's a nice bold color line change and it's easy to see. So I line up my ruler with that stripe, and since I have a vertical stripe, when I run out of ruler off to the right, I'll just line it up with another vertical stripe. It works really great. And with this nice and close to the edge, close enough that I think I will cut off all of the really weird stuff, but not run off the edge, then I just run a line right along the edge of the ruler. Now you're not trying to go for a really dark line, but it needs to be dark enough to be able to see it. As we zoom in here, I think you will be able to see the line that I drew there. Let's see. We'll repeat this on down the fabric. And here we are. I'm going to extend the line that I had drawn. I overlap it a little bit just to be sure that I'm following the same line. And in this case, because I have a vertical stripe, I'm lining it up also with that vertical stripe. Now remember, there is a thickness to the lead, so you don't want to get the edge of the ruler exactly on top of the line, but just right next to it. And then you draw some more line. Then you move your fabric or the ruler and draw it again until you have a nice straight line all along the top edge of your fabric. Now for this next phase, I'm going to pretend two things. One, I'm going to pretend that's the full width of my fabric. And two, I'm going to be pretending that I'm making a really small pillow, and this is as large as I need to cut out my fabric. There's two ways you can lay the fabric out in order to cut it. One is this way, where the selvage is on the ends and you cut it out crossways. The other direction is where the selvage is along a long edge, and laying it this way is called lengthwise. I will have the directions in the PDF that goes with this lesson that will tell you whether the long direction should be cut the crosswise on your fabric or lengthwise. Now if you have certain sizes of pillow and certain widths of fabric, you will be cutting it lengthwise, but there's probably on that fabric going to be room for two, which works out really nicely if you're doing a pair of pillows for your bed or for your couch. If you're only doing one pillow for the office chair in your office, well, you've got some extra fabric. So when you've referred to my directions and have discovered how big of a piece of fabric you need to cut, I suggest you flip over to the back side of your fabric. Most of these printed fabrics are white on the back, and it's a whole lot easier to see a pencil mark. Then I suggest you go ahead and draw a line that's straight across and one that's perpendicular to it, down the number of inches you need to go. Then flip your measuring device and do a straight line across the bottom and then back up to the top. When you've done that, you end up with something that is square or rectangular. Let's say it's like this. One quick way to make sure that your corners are actually perpendicular and 90 degrees to each other and not skewed one way or another is by measuring. And here's another little pretend. We're going to pretend that the edges of this plastic box are actually lines drawn on the fabric. Now, a way that you can figure out if what you have drawn is more or less even is to measure from corner to corner, and on this way we've got 15 inches, and then measure corner to corner the other way. And lining it up carefully right here, it looks like 15 inches. So in this case, the top of our lid has square corners. On your fabric, it doesn't have to be exact. If you're within about a 1/4 inch or so, it is probably close enough. Or if you followed a line or stripe in your fabric, that's more important. One thing to be aware of is that some fabrics may have shrunk. And now let's assume that this is a cut edge right down here. So you can't see it here anymore. And perhaps the way you had laid it out, you're going slightly off of the fabric. That's not going to work. Too small means two things. Either you have to get a smaller pillow form and you're making a smaller pillow, or you need to go buy a little bit more fabric and start over. So you can fudge this a little bit as long as the edges don't go off your fabric. Make sure that the edges of your drawn rectangle are completely contained within the fabric and that the corners are square so that when you measure on the diagonal the two different ways, that the numbers are pretty close to each other. And here is another illustration, this time on paper. I have drawn out the rectangle that represents the size of fabric I need to cut, and then I've measured diagonally each direction. And in this particular case, it's 10 7/8 inches both directions, so I know that each one of these corners is a square corner and that my pillow will end up even. Now the numbers that you're going to be dealing with are going to be much larger. They'll be like 60 or 70 inches perhaps for the larger pillows. That's not a problem. They're supposed to be that big, but you might not have a ruler that long. How are you going to measure it then? It would seem like an easy way to do it perhaps is to fold it along this line and measure it along something long like your table or the back of the couch. But that doesn't work on fabric because fabric has a grain line. There's lines going this way and there's lines going this way. So long as you are pulling the fabric in those directions, it's pretty stable. But if you pull it along the diagonal, the fabric stretches. So you would end up with different numbers. What you can do is get some ordinary string. Cotton string is fantastic because it doesn't stretch. Twine works also. Yarn tends to be a little bit stretchy, so it's not so very good for this. But what you can do is hold one corner and one piece at one corner and then pinch it at the other corner, marking it with your thumbnails, and then try it the other way. Boom, there it is. It's the same. No numbers required. It's exactly that long of my string, both directions, so it's square. That's how you can measure something that is too long for your longest measuring device. Okay, so we've assumed that you have very carefully drawn out that rectangle on your fabric, and you've measured it a couple of times each direction to make sure you've got the right size, and you've checked the diagonals and they are the same or pretty darn close to the same. Now you're ready to cut out your fabric. Just use your fabric scissors or the best scissors you've got, which might actually be the one from the knife block in your kitchen, and very carefully cut along that line. Now something you may want to do is to mark your sewing line before you actually cut out. Let me show you how to do that. For easy math, we're going to be using 1/2 inch seams on our project here. So this is something to do on the back side and ideally with a pencil. So you'll mark every few inches or so. You don't need to do this solidly across the entire piece, but just every so often. And then you take your straight edge, line up the marks that you have made, and score a light pencil line. You'll need to do this on the two long edges of the project. And like I said, it's best to do that before you cut it out because the edges of the fabric are just a little bit more stable. But if you forgot, you can do it later also. So mark a ½ inch along here, especially if you're new to sewing. It will really help when you're trying to make your stitches go in a straight line and not veer off someplace. And then you just cut along the line. It's easier to cut straight if you keep your scissors flat down against the table like this, rather than up in the air. That's it for today's episode, for today's step in the project. Tomorrow we will fold this in a magic way and begin sewing.